Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast, talking all things movement, whole food nutrition and environmental wellness, with your hosts, Ben and Emma.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode where we bring you discussions that generate the awareness on very topical issues that really we should all be well informed on, and this episode is certainly no exception. My name is Ben Adelberg, coming to you from Auckland.
And my name's Emma Stratt, coming to you from Boona.
Right, so now before we introduce to you our next guest, we first want to say that this being episode number 14, you have not missed an episode since the awesome chat we had with Brad Dixon a few weeks ago. But rather, we have skipped a few weeks and that will now be part of the flow. When we first started, we thought we'd aim for an episode, say, every 2-3 weeks, but we've somehow managed to deliver 13 successive weeks. Now that, especially for me in New Zealand, life is back to normality. We need to work around both Emma and my super busy schedules as well as that of our guests. So from here on forward, make sure you subscribe to the show, follow our social media on either Instagram or Facebook, and you'll know as soon as each new episode is live. So, Emma, who have we got on today?
All right, our guest today is scientist Gerard Wedderburn-Bisshop. Now, until 2010, Gerard worked as a principal scientist with the Queensland government, where his team monitored broad-scale deforestation. And we'll actually be talking to the causes of this today. Now, Gerard is a superbly knowledgeable and super busy human. At the moment, he's working for the World Preservation Foundation, currently involved in some really exciting projects, which we'll chat about today, and also acts as a director of Replant Byron. Gerard does a brilliant job at communicating environmental issues with his presentation entitled Appetite for Destruction, which discusses how food could make or break our world. Now, this is a really important presentation, and this is where I first met Gerard at one of his talks. So we are absolutely thrilled to have such a wealth of knowledge on the show today. So, Gerard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Emma, and hi, Ben.
Now, Gerard, this is really well timed because a very recent guest, Dr. Mike Joy from New Zealand, spoke a little bit about the effects of deforestation, especially on water quality. But just the past few days here in parts of New Zealand, we've had an absolute deluge. And that has once again reared the ugly head of another effect of logging, and that is forestry slash. So before we get into this whole conversation about deforestation and so on, Gerard, let's start off from the beginning. Please tell us a little bit about your background, what you studied, and what inspired you to take this path.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Just to give your listeners a bit of background on me, after a long career in remote sensing science in federal and state government, I ended up with a Queensland group, well-resourced group, doing a monitoring of deforestation and vegetation across Queensland. Mm-hmm. Our whole purpose was to settle the argument between the developers and the conservationists as to how much clearing was going on in Queensland. And it turned out to be extreme, huge amounts of clearing. But over a period of years, we took all the satellite imagery that was available, Landsat satellite, and we built up a picture of now more than 30 years of deforestation in Queensland to a very accurate level. And it's probably the most accurate data in Australia. But that's important because Queensland's home to about 3/4 or more of Australia's tree clearing. So it's great. It was really good to get a picture of what was happening in Queensland. We had a team of, really well resourced, we had a team of over a dozen people, and we crawled across the countryside. We wore out a four-wheel drive every year, ground truthing our satellite imagery. But the figures, if you like, I'll go into some of them now. The figures
Sure.
are just staggering. You might have noticed when you see a new suburb, for example, we all live in cities. So when you see a new suburb develop, it might be beside the road, and you think to yourself, my God, that used to be trees. It's all gone now, and it might be, say, a square kilometre, 1 kilometre by another kilometre by a kilometre, and you think to yourself, wow, that's a lot of trees. But the amount of clearing that's going on in Queensland still is about 400,000 hectares per year, which I'll break that down for you. That comes to more than 1,000 hectares a day, 1,100 hectares a day, which is about 2.5 kilometres long and 5 kilometres in the other direction. That's 11 square kilometres
a day.
So every day we're clearing the equivalent of several suburbs.
That is
out in the bush. It's totally hidden.
And is there a particular part of Queensland that's more prevalent? So, say Northern Queensland, or is this across the board?
Yeah. What's been happening is that the clearing was initially, back in the 80s, it was initially from the Darling Downs out towards the west, and then up into the desert uplands, and now into the reef catchments, the Burdekin and the Fitzroy catchments. There's a little bit of clearing on the Cape, but it's much poorer soils, much lesser productivity. So the mulga, of course, was the and the brigalow. Those are the two biomes that were particularly looked at because of the rich soils. But over that period, over 30 years, we've been clearing that, on average, 11 square kilometres per day. And on average, more than half of that is virgin bush. That's old growth. So the rest of it was regrowth. And 90+% of it was for grazing pasture, so for beef or sheep production. So, given that that's 3/4 of Australia's land clearing, that's gobsmacking. That means that Australia or Queensland is up there in relation to, say, Brazilian land clearing. You've got more than half the amount of the area of clearing that they do there. By the way, I'll just go into a little bit about land clearing. Australians are amazing people. We invented the most destructive methods for land clearing there are. And it was back in the day, in the 50s, it was two crawler tractors and a big chain between them, or rope, or that kind of thing. It was weighted down, and these things crawled forward at walking pace, and they just stripped the countryside. Now, of course, we do it with two of the biggest bulldozers you can find, D9s, which are 50 tonnes each and bigger. And the chain between them is usually about 100 metres long. Each link of the chain is a bit too heavy for your eye to lift. And these things can be also weighted down in the middle by a big steel ball to keep the killing height, if you like, of the chain at about waist height above the ground. So these bulldozers, and it's a scene to imagine. I'll just paint a picture for you. These two huge bulldozers go flat chat. So the roar of these huge diesel engines is there. The chain behind them is clanking like a huge chain would do. It's the trees are cracking and breaking and smashing and thumping on the ground. The wildlife, of course, is totally disrupted. If there's a lot of birds around, which there usually are, the shrieks of the corellas and the cockatoos is just ear splittering. And you add that all together, and animals scattering willy-nilly. But it's a real spectacle, and this is extremely effective in killing forests. We invented it. It's now being used in the south of Brazil, in the subtropics there, in what's called the Cerrado, which is home to now the world's largest clearing area, all for large-scale soy and maize production for, mainly for export to feed livestock, and China's a big customer of theirs. So. This tree clearing business is awe-inspiring. So we're crawling across the countryside And as it happened, my group used to, well, probably still do, take about $500,000 in funding from Meat and Livestock Australia. And that money funds various research projects. And because we had a group of some of the best pasture agronomists and climate experts in Queensland, that was that sort of, the Long Paddock website. If you go onto that, it's a forecasting website for farmers. It's really quite good. But our group was oriented towards supporting the farmers. So they all knew my views about all this clearing, but I discovered in about 10 years ago that some of my staff even had been working on this report that was a greenwash of the beef industry. It argued that since the Central Queensland forests weren't being burned so often, the trees were thickening, and also because at that time the rate of deforestation was going down, they argued that the Queensland beef industry was carbon neutral.
Oh.
Anyway, I read this thing and I stormed into my boss. He wasn't there. I then stormed into his boss and the director, and she wasn't there. So I left and I penned a long email and then left, and that was the last I saw of Queensland government. So since then, I've been, that sort of destruction, 11 square kilometres a day, and 90-something% of that for beef production, it's breathtaking. It makes you think, what on earth are we doing to our planet? How can we possibly keep this going? And it's we can't.
We can't. Absolutely.
Clearly, we can't. We are now reaching the point where, amongst the literature, they're talking about ecological collapse. With climate change, they're talking about even the Amazon turning to savanna because of the changed water cycles.
Yeah, I just want to ask something here because I'm just angry. I mean, you've jumped straight into it, and the figures are just staggering, and I'm just angry hearing this. How do you cope seeing this every single day and for a long period of time? Now, the other thing I want to join as part of this question as well is there's a lot of I guess anger in the world and objection to the burning of the Amazon forest and Southeast Asia, the destruction that these palm plantations are causing loss of biodiversity, animals and so on. Yet how come we don't have any objection or uproar or anything like that to what's happening in Australia's own backyard? Is it the lack of awareness? Is it because it's literally out in the middle of nowhere? Why do we not know about this happening right in Australia? And for me to get angry just hearing this as a once-off, I want to do something about it already. So why are we not hearing about this?
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right, Ben. It's something that's been going on out in the bush. We don't see it. In fact, when you drive out in the bush, they usually leave a buffer along the roads. In fact, it is public land. It's a road, which it's not private property. It's road, and people don't see beyond that.
Yeah.
But when you do see beyond that, you see that the satellite images tell the story. It's wholesale clearing. It's just dramatic. But we live in cities largely, so we don't see it. The only group that has been keeping the guys honest is the Wilderness Society, and they've got some amazing drone footage up on YouTube. You can Google that and just have a look at the dozers at work and how they're just flattening. The information that my group produced was actually instrumental in Queensland tightening up its tree clearing laws, which was really good. But just in the years before that led up to that, there was panic clearing with farmers expecting the tightening up, and then the tightening, then a change of government, so it eased up again. And so it just went, a lot of things became self-assessable, like for example, a lot of rampant tree clearing was done in the name of thinning. So if they leave one tree in every 300, they call that thinning, and it's self-assessable. So, no one wants to upset the farmers. No one wants to be seen to be upsetting the farmers. And so it's actually a crying shame what we've done. Years ago, when we had pasture agronomists whose job it was to, for example, set conditions for government leases, which most of this land is actually government land, leased to graziers. And back in the day, up till about the 70s, there were conditions on those leases that required the landholder to actually clear the land. And it was called development. And that was the mindset then. The farmers cleared the land with the view that they were doing exactly the right thing for their family, for the community, for the country, for feeding the cities, for the nation. But now we know differently. Now we
course
know that...
now with what we know, there's a lot of other bad habits we used to have. Smoking used to be good for you. Drinking Coca-Cola was good for you. But, we've changed our opinions on that. And why are we not changing our opinions on this?
Yeah, no, that's right. It's because people don't know. They're largely totally unaware of what's happening beyond the city fringes. We stick to the coast. We holiday on the coast. We live on the coast. We never go inland. But if you do venture inland, it's just staggering. It's just gobsmacking. In the last 10 years since I left, the focus of the tree clearing has gone to the reef catchments, to the Burdekin and the Fitzroy. And that's been an incredible tragedy. It was well recognised in those days that the biggest pollutant of the Great Barrier Reef, the worst threat to the reef, is the fine pollutants. The sediment that was washed out of the rivers, the very fine pollutants that stay in suspension. So it's washed out of the rivers, it gets plunged out into the Barrier Reef Lagoon, and it settles on the reef, or it covers the reef in this fine silt, which depresses the amount of sunlight that reaches the corals, and it allows it suppresses their vitality, so the crown of thorns go nuts, etc. So this was seen as the major killer of the Barrier Reef. Now they see the major killer as the temperatures from climate change, and also the acidity in the future. So sediment is still the biggest killer of the reef, and what they were doing in the Burdekin and the Fitzroy and other catchments that funneled out onto the Barrier Reef was clearing like crazy. The bulldozers, they don't give a damn about the watercourses. The bulldozers just flat out, full steam ahead. They just the creeks, the watercourses are just flattened along with everything else. And 70%, they do a reef report every year, and 70% of the sediment that goes out on the Barrier Reef is from grazing lands, not from sugarcane or other agricultural lands. So grazing is the big one, and it's self-assessable. There's no government requirement to leave the watercourses uncleared, for example, or to stop clearing in these reef catchments. It's all a voluntary code that what I read was 17% of the industry are actually abiding by the code. The rest of them don't give a damn. So we're trashing our planet. This is just an example, right? It's a glaring example to me because I've seen it, I've heard it, I've witnessed it.
Yeah.
But to most people, it still doesn't exist. It's out there. It's this nebulous thing that's out there that we know. Oh, we need to take care of our planet. But what amazes me is we were at a meeting. For example, the last meeting we had, board meeting of the Replant Byron. We had about 20 people sitting around this boardroom table. We had an amazing gathering of people, and of course, the activists down that way are very active, and they're very green. And our ambition is to plant 1.8 million trees. And the reason for that is the number of trees that will soak up that will balance the emissions from the land, from agriculture within that shire. And 1.8 million trees, and everyone's saying, wow, 1.8 million, this is huge, this is wonderful. And then I did the sums, and I got back to them at the last meeting, and I said, look, 1.8 million trees is wonderful. And we had our first planting. We planted something like 2,500 trees. You know, the land's donated, the money's donated. It's all really good stuff. People patting themselves on the back. 100 people turned out to do it. We had a party.
That's brilliant.
But what I told them was this: 1.8 million trees is actually cleared in less than 1 week.
Exactly.
In Queensland.
Always playing catch up if we have that mindset with things. I was reading a statistic the other day that said globally we cut down 15 billion trees each year. So, you know, we can do all the replanting that we can, but we're always going to be playing catch up if we don't actually address the actual problem.
But we do need to start somewhere. I mean, that can generate. I agree, but you know, it can generate momentum as well, and say, okay,
absolutely,
you know,
but don't greenwash the problem.
Yeah, no, I agreed. It's and at the same time, and it's becoming an expression used quite often now. But it's like, you know, the tap that's on and the sink's overflowing with water, and all you're doing is getting a mop and a bucket as opposed to turning the tap off. So, you know, it's about addressing the actual root of the problem here.
Yeah, dead right, Ben. And the last figures I saw was that for every tree that's planted, about 100 are chopped down.
Gosh.
Thankfully, nature is doing an amazing job of trying to balance our destruction.
But let's not forget, we're planting a tree to replace, you know, represent 100 trees, say. But what are we doing about the rest of the biodiversity? You know, the birds, the wildlife that's been destroyed forever. You know, species going extinct. You know, migration of animals and so on. And yeah, it goes a lot further than that.
Yes. Which actually leads into the concept of planetary boundaries. And this was some groundbreaking work done in the last 20 years. It's been wonderful work out of Europe, and they've defined 9 different areas where there are boundaries. We are at risk of overstepping these boundaries, and if we overstep any one of these boundaries, we risk all life on Earth. And I'll just quickly run through them. Things like they're things like greenhouse biodiversity, like you're talking about, cropland use, freshwater use, nitrogen and phosphorus, ocean acidification, atmosphere, aerosols, stratosphere, and novel poisons in the environment. And it turns out that we have way overstepped 2 of those. Already, we're in the midst of the 6th great extinction. We have increased the amount of biodiversity loss to the point that it's 1,000 times greater than it used to be. And what that means is that we're heading for environmental collapse if we do nothing, if we continue to trash the forests, if we continue to trash the other environment, the other ecosystems, if we continue to trash the ocean like we are, we're in for ecosystem collapse. And the other one is climate change. Sorry, no, it's not climate change. It's actually nitrogen and phosphorus.
And phosphorus, yeah.
Yeah. Which is amazing. Nitrogen is an amazing story. If you've got a minute.
We'll give you 5.
Yeah, nitrogen is just astounding. It's nitrogen. The first level test of any food for protein content.
Yeah.
If you test any food for protein content, the first level test is nitrogen content, because nitrogen equals protein in that sense. So the miracle of photosynthesis fixes nitrogen in the plants. So all proteins that we have in the world, all proteins, come from photosynthesis, and they're fixed in leaves and other parts of plants. So everyone, animals and us, all get our protein from plants. Now, the process of getting nitrogen to the plants is done through an amazing symphony of biota that supply it through the roots, and we're living in an atmosphere of nitrogen, but 70% nitrogen, but the nitrogen that the plants can use is called reactive nitrogen, and that comes basically from organisms in the soil. However, we've invented this other process that literally creates reactive nitrogen fertilizer out of thin air. It's the Haber-Bosch process, and it's been responsible for the green revolution. We've created this nitrogen fertilizer, and with that, we've been able to feed this revolution, the green revolution that's fed the world. And we've been patting ourselves on the back for that. But of course, by doing that with conventional agricultural methods, we're trashing the soils. But that's another story. But the thing is, what we create now with fertilizer from thin air is equal to all of the natural reactive nitrogen production. So what we've effectively done is we have doubled the carrying capacity of planet Earth. That means that we've been able to support more living things that eat that protein. We've been able to support twice the amount of living things than we have in the past, purely because we've got this nitrogen fertilizer that now feeds the crops, and the crops feed the animals, and we eat the animals, that sort of thing. To the point where of the mammals that live on Earth, just 4% of those mammals are now wildlife. Just 4%. 60% of the mammals on Earth are livestock, cows and sheep and goats, etc. And 36% are humans, right? So 96% of all the mammals on Earth are humans and their livestock. Just 4% are wild still. What we've done is so unbalanced, the natural order, that this nitrogen pollution now threatens our very existence. Because what happens? Nitrogen pollutes the waterways. You've all heard of
through eutrophication and
that's right. And then hundreds of ocean dead zones, and it goes on. And we're killing our environment. Actually, another little figure from this other diagram that I'm looking at now: 70% of the birds on planet Earth are chickens and other poultry. 30% are wild.
It's just mind-boggling, this imbalance, and I mean it's quite ironic. You talk about nitrogen being supportive, and yet it's inadvertently actually the cause of, like we say, killing a lot of our waterways, the oceans. It's actually creating pollution back, and that's that point of what you say now is we've overstepped the mark. It's not self-repairable anymore. We actually need to create action to drastically reverse this.
Yes, exactly. And if I can just give you a quick, an elevator pitch, if I can put into a few sentences the real problem we have on planet Earth. Mm-hmm. It's that we've overstepped these boundaries. We're close to overstepping other planetary boundaries, like, for example, climate change, deforestation, and a few others. Water cycles are way out. We're very close to overstepping those. What can solve those problems? And it's amazingly simple. And it goes back to land use, which is a pretty boring topic, but it's basically how do we use our planet? And it's fascinating. It's really fascinating how we use our planet. If you look at, I'm pulling up a diagram here, but of the of the land that we use, okay, if you take away the water, if you take away the forests that we haven't actually, that we don't extract things from, if you take away the ice and the snow and the deserts that we don't actually use, what's left is it's pasture, it's crops, it's infrastructure and cities. Okay, well, if you look at the infrastructure and cities and mining together, that constitutes less than 2% of the land that we use.
So when people talk about the ill effects of mining, we haven't had a guest that's been solely, an expert in mining, but when we talk about deforestation and I guess the impacts of pasture grazing, grazing pastures, how much of an impact does mining itself cause? But now you've pretty much answered it. It's such a whatever impact it's causing, it's insignificant compared to the rest of what the land is used for.
Exactly, and the land use that's exist is pasture, is grazing pasture. In fact, 3/4 of the land that we use is dedicated to grazing animals. Now let's think about this. Let's put it in a picture so for our listeners. If you and your family lived on an island and you knew that you were cutting down your forest too fast, you knew that you were polluting the air too fast, your water cycles were crazy, the climate was changing, your crops were failing, you had droughts, you had dead zones in your oceans, etc. How could you address that? And if you look at 3/4 of your island, if that's devoted to grazing animals, you have an incredibly powerful tool there to address all of these issues just by saying, okay, well, what does that give us? That grazing land, what does that give us? It gives us red meat and some dairy. Some dairy comes from feedlots, and some dairy comes from pastures, but those pastures, what do they give us? Red meat and some dairy. So, okay, are we prepared to forego red meat and dairy to save our island? And the power of that is this: if you were to take that 3/4 of the island and turn it back to wildlife habitat, turn it back to forest, turn it back to what it used to be, you would do several things in one blow. You would fix up the climate because you're drawing down actually decades of carbon dioxide emissions. Mm-hmm. So immediately you roll back the climate problem. You'd also fix the biodiversity crisis, the extinction crisis, because you're immediately providing all that habitat for wildlife. You immediately fix the water cycle process because forests create their own water cycles. They're the engine that drives the water cycle. So the rain gets steady again. You stop having these wild droughts and floods. And nitrogen, of course, all those animals on the land, they're not producing the nitrogen. So that's, in a nutshell, what we're talking about here. That island is planet Earth, and that's how we use it. 3/4 of it is for grazing animals. So can we humans, get off red meat? Can we get off dairy? And in doing that, we can change our world. We can fix those crises that are imminent, fix the 2 planetary boundaries that we've overstepped, and fix the other planetary boundaries that we're close to overstepping. It's a powerful, powerful thing. We can do it. Any of us can do it. We just need to change our diet.
Well, the three of us here, I think we all know we can do it. Yes. But it's I guess, it seems so simple. It really does. And yet, are a lot of good people, good minds with good resources taking, how do I put this? Not the incorrect approach, but there's so many angles to this. The rationale for reducing meat and dairy intake. But if it's really, if a lot of the focus is on the actual land, the land use and the clearing of what actually supports life on this planet. I mean, growing up as a kid at school, we always knew trees give us oxygen, trees give us life.
Yes.
Why something so fundamental are we missing the point now to some degree that it's not more of a global effort? Why are we focusing our energy into so many other areas that are really a small facet of the problem?
Yes, absolutely.
Does it go back to the whole awareness thing? I've written that here in my notes in big and bold. Is it the lack of awareness? Because out of sight, out of mind, you're driving on these big highways, they leave these little buffers, so you're surrounded by trees. Oh, it's so beautiful, it's so scenic. And yet you're not actually looking beyond that, where that's where the horrors are.
Absolutely. It's what we're doing to our planet that is largely unseen, or if it's so slow that we're just not noticing it. A few years back, my wife and I went back to the UK, our first trip over there, and we did spend 3 weeks up to the Scottish Highlands. And we're looking at this wild and beautiful and amazing landscape in the Scottish Highlands. And I was talking to some guy who was involved with forests over there. I said, forests up here? He said, yes, the name for Scotland used to be Caledonia, which meant forest.
Huh.
And before humans got at it in a big way, that whole of northern Britain was forested. Same with Ireland. It's now covered with sheep. And of course, sheep eat anything. So if you've got a little seedling, a tree that actually happens to escape and springs up, chomp, it's gone. If you have sheep on the land, chomp, it's gone. It's the way to change the land use. So, that's a bleak and beautiful landscape.
Yeah.
But wow, wasn't it? It used to be tall forest.
Well, pretty much what New Zealand was as well in most parts.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly right. Yeah, so this virus, for example, is showing us that we have, and a lot of long-time ecologists are saying exactly this. We have overstepped nature. We have trodden on nature way too far. We have pushed it back so that the boundary between the wild animals and ourselves is way too close. We're too close to animals. And we must, and it's not only that, 3/4 of all the communicable diseases have been zoonotic. They've come from animals. And if you wanted to create an environment it's a perfect petri dish to create these sort of nasty viruses, it's factory farming. We drip feed them these antibiotics just to keep them healthy. It's not too much that it kills all the antibiotics, but what it does, it creates the antibiotic resistant bacteria and other greeblies, and that comes through, and that's what we're doing. We have so mistreated the animal world and the natural world. This is payback. This is kickback. We know now, or it's in our face. We can't deny it anymore. We've got to step back from nature. We've got to hand back some of the planet to the wildlife, which is, after all, it's the web of life that keeps us all alive. It was famously stated that if the bees were to die off, then we would have just a few seasons, and then all the humans would be dead. Bees are not the only pollinators, of course, but that's how strong it is. We live in harmony with them, and we can't trash them like we have been doing.
Exactly. Yeah. Can't agree more. And that kind of brings us to the important work that you're currently doing with the World Preservation Foundation. So tell us a little bit about that. Very exciting stuff.
Yeah. This is really good. The amount of documentaries that have come out lately, just in the last couple of years, about this very thing, about how what we have on our plate every day, how that impacts our planet and ourselves, our health. It's amazing to see the number of documentaries on that. I've been involved now through the World Preservation Foundation writing a book that's to be released with the documentary coming out, and we hope September, called Eating Our Way to Extinction. There's going to be this book, which is environmental and health and transcripts of interviews with luminaries all around the world. There's also going to be meal planners and helpful stuff that will help people make that transition to plant eating rather than animal eating. There's going to be lots of online resources. We just finished writing a huge Mythbuster section, for example.
Oh, great.
And
They're
is
very
this going
comprehensive.
is this going to have a focus on sort of this part of the world, Australia, or is it going to be more of a global direction?
Yeah, it's definitely global.
Yeah.
It's looking at, they actually have some footage from Brazil, from the deforestation over there.
Mm-hmm.
And they look at, for example, salmon farming in Northern Europe and the impact of that. They look at a lot of different things, but I've seen an early cut of the film. James Cameron is now an executive director, so
exciting.
Yeah.
Another big one coming
the
up.
big guns.
Yeah.
Yeah. And hopefully it will be on Netflix.
Brilliant.
Well, we've
that's
seen how
another one.
effective that was for the Game Changers, so this would certainly pave the way for this whole awareness we've been talking about. This will hopefully really generate that.
Yeah, so that's the big thing there, and we've been busily working away, doing lab experiments which we show with different gases and how that impacts the ice sculpture melting, all sorts of things like that.
Wow.
And yeah, it's fairly in your face. It's just a collection of interviews with the experts in their fields. And the evidence is no longer up for debate. The talk that I give, for example, it used to be called Eating Our Way. What is it? What was it?
Appetite for Destruction.
Appetite for Destruction, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, now it's called Eat Plants, Plant Trees, Survive and Thrive. And
nice, I like it.
Yeah.
To the point.
Yeah. Stop beating around the bush. Excuse the pun.
Yeah, that's right. But in it, I give a whole lot of information, and it's all, none of it is controversial anymore. It used to be that if you wanted to connect the dots relating to diet and the environment, you'd have to dig through non-government organisation, non-peered review or grey literature. But now there's just an avalanche of good peer-reviewed science that backs up everything that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
The fact is that what we eat has more impact on our planet than anything else we do. It's not our iPhones. It's not batteries for our cars. It's what we eat.
Yeah.
So if you really want to make a difference, that's where to do it.
Now I've heard you present one of your presentations. You talk about animal agriculture being, if not one of, but the greatest source of short-lived carbon producers and methane. And the problem with this is that it's generally underreported. And so therefore, because you talk about information now being more readily available, and yet there's still, who is it that's underreporting and why? Why are a lot of these figures being underreported? Why are we being misled? Why is it being obscured? The impact of these emissions.
That's a really good question, Ben, and we've been struggling with that. The thing is that there's a number of highly respected people in the climate science area who think that focusing on anything other than carbon dioxide is the wrong thing to do. Mm-hmm. They believe that, the thing is that, to give you a bit of climate science, carbon dioxide is a nasty gas. And if you burn fossil fuels, you send it up in the atmosphere, half of the CO2 in the atmosphere is gone after about 30 years, and then it tails off so that 10% of that after 1,000 years, 10% of the initial emission is still in the air. So it's that long, nasty tail that is the problem with carbon dioxide. So that's why they're worried. You know, they're thinking now that if we care about the atmosphere for our children and grandchildren, that's what we should be focusing on. So they do tricky things like they say, okay, let's treat methane as a pulse, and let's say that a constant methane emission will be a pulse, and it's always there, and it doesn't do a lot of warming, but it's always there in the atmosphere. The trouble with that is that methane's emissions and methane atmospheric concentration has tripled in the time when atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide has gone up 40% only. So methane's gone up 3 times, 300%. And methane's gone after about 10 years, right? So they see that and they say, short term, it's no problem, it's only lasts a decade, da-da-da. However, and scientists have been grappling with how do we compare the apples and oranges. We've got gases that last such different times in the atmosphere. How do we compare them? And this is where the heart of the ongoing debate is. If you do your greenhouse accounting, you account for the warming of those gases over a short period, that will amplify the effects of the short-term gases like methane. If you do your accounting over a long period, that strengthens the effects of the long-term gases like carbon dioxide. What the IPCC have chosen is 100 years standard. This is the standard that everything's compared with. Well, the problem is that 100 years is way too long, because what's going to happen is that climate change is going to come up and grab us within the next decades, not 100 years. So what I was a co-author of Beyond Zero Emissions Land Use Plan for Australia, and what we did there, in fact, I can highly recommend that. It's really good reading because I wrote it. And
well, we were going to ask about that actually, so it's quite timely you brought it up.
But what we did is we looked at the impact of agricultural and livestock emissions over a standard 100 years, and then we looked at their impact over 20 years. In other words, the emissions from livestock, how are they going to affect the warming of the emissions over the next 20 years? And the results are dramatic. Over 100 years, we did some tricky things. We teased apart the data on deforestation, and we attributed that to agriculture. And we also we counted some of the gases that are not counted in official inventories, but we had the data for, and we included that. And over a 100-year accounting, it turns out that agriculture is responsible for just over a third of Australia's emissions. But we looked at over 20 years, and we found that over half of the national emissions come from agriculture, and just under half come from livestock, because livestock produce so much methane. They produce. There's this other category called prescribed burning of savannas, which is just pasture maintenance. It emits a lot of methane. They don't count the carbon dioxide because that sunk the following year. But it emits a lot of methane. It emits a lot of another uncounted gas called carbon monoxide, which leads also to tropospheric ozone, etc., etc. I won't go into that, but if you include the deforestation in there as well, we found that almost half of the Australian emissions over that 20-year period, right? We're not forgetting about what happens after then, but over 20 years, almost half the national emissions are livestock emissions. Now, that is dramatic. And what happened was that Beyond Zero Emissions, the board looked at that, and they were just about to have a change of CEO. And they all looked at this and they said, this is awful. And then they decided, no, this is too much. We can't upset the farmers. And so they dropped it.
Wow.
But it's there. You can get it you can download the report on the Beyond Zero Emissions website, and you can see what I'm talking about. But it is dramatic. If you look at the impact of this year's emissions on a short term, like the next decade or two, agriculture plays a much, much greater role than if you look a century ahead. And people, it's largely unappreciated. The fact that the figure that most people go back to now is the FAO committee report. They involved all the livestock sectors and a bunch of other people and the industry, and they decided that livestock are only responsible for 14.5% of global emissions. Well, that's using 100-year accounting, and it's using some tricky figures regarding deforestation. So anyway, the fact is that there will always be this argument about livestock emissions because it's apples and oranges. You can't compare methane to carbon dioxide. And if you try and do that, and people like us have done it in the Beyond Zero Emissions report, if you try to do that, people will always take pot shots at it, which is exactly what happened to a paper by Goodland and Anhang. They did he was with World Bank, PhD. He wrote an article for World Watch magazine that said that more than half of the global emissions come from agriculture. And he used some amazing tricky things that no one else had used before, and he was shot down. It was unbelievable. But all of what he said is actually arguable. So if you're talking emissions, the take home from all of that is that over the short term, agriculture is the most effective thing we can do to slow down the warming in the short term. If you want to, but it's a double whammy. It's amazing. In the short term, if you were to slash methane from agriculture, and fracking, by the way, but if you were to slash methane and agricultural emissions, it would slow down the climate change straight away. And if you were to turn back those pastures to woodlands and trees and forests, it would draw down several decades of emissions. So you've got the short term covered and you've got the long term covered. Agriculture and land use is an amazing fertile area for solving climate change, and it hasn't been explored anywhere near where it should be.
You talk about, or you mentioned, upsetting the farmers, but in terms of who needs to change, is it the farmers or is it the consumer that needs to change?
Yeah, absolutely. Farmers are amazing people. I've met a lot of farmers, and they are the most resilient, most optimistic. They're amazing. They roll with the markets. They roll with the droughts and the floods. Yeah. They suffer all sorts of pressures, and they're still happy. Largely, although farmer suicide's been going up. But in any case, if people change what they eat, farmers will follow. They're not going to produce beef if no one's eating it. It's not that they love producing cows for slaughter. They don't. They just do it because that's what they've always done. But if there's no money in it anymore, they won't do it.
And I think that's a key, because that's, in New Zealand, the dairy industry is so well protected because it's a massive contributor to our exports. Fonterra is one of the world's biggest dairy producers. There's a lot of protection where the money is, lamb and beef as well. So like you say, the underreporting, the protection, the loath to change, it's at the top. But farmers themselves, the people on the ground, so to speak, they'll go with the flow, won't they? They'll go where the demand is. So really, the demand needs to start coming from us.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So when it comes to the consumer then, what do you think is the main problem to be addressing? Do you think it's just a matter of education, or are there some more novel approaches that we should be taking to get everyone on board?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, Emma, and it's not one that I'm qualified to answer, really.
Yeah.
But
It's
the
a hard
people,
one, isn't it?
the people I meet who have made big changes in their diet, the reason that most people do it and keep doing it is for the animals, basically.
Yeah.
They've looked at those horrible videos of mistreatment and torture of these critters and realised I'm causing that. So they've stepped back from it. And they're the ones who made that decision and stay. It's so easy now, of course, to be plant-based. Look at every supermarket is full with products that are plant protein, not meat protein.
Yeah. You know, using that as an example, you were at the climate change conference, I don't know when, but semi-recently in Durban. And that's, by the way, is actually where I come from. So I was really excited that when, when I saw an interview that you did and spoke about the soybean. I didn't know this. The big soybean production, the edamame beans and so on in the whole KwaZulu-Natal region, the province that Durban sits in. And you also mentioned the product fries, which I actually, when I say grew up on, I didn't grow up on it, eating it every day, but I recall it at its infancy, this product that came out with one product that was this, meat alternative. I wasn't vegetarian even then. We still ate meat at home, but we've never been big meat eaters. But I remember this product, fries. It was this fake polony, it was all soy based, and then a couple of years later came out an option of a sausage or a burger patty, and that was it for years. And now you go in the supermarket, it's exported globally, and they've got a ridiculous range of products, and now one of many brands out there. But I was really you had sort of mentioned, I mean, it's very specific, but the whole conversion of land use and the ability for everyone thinks soybean China, that's where soy comes from, but other countries can grow a lot of these products, a lot of these crops, and so on. So there really are alternatives, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. And Wally Fry, he was one of the pioneers, of course, in this field. But gee, there's been some amazing developments recently. But just to touch on soybeans and China, this is a really interesting one. China has actually been increasing the amount of forest in their own country. What happened was 3, 4, 5 decades ago, they got busy and they cleared a lot of their country. And then they had some massive downpours and floods and landslips. And their scientists said, oh, this is because we cleared the trees. So they got into this process, and then they started to get their droughts. The Gobi Desert was marching eastward, and they said, well, we've got to fix this. And so they had the Great Green Wall. They planted trees to stop its advancement, and they planted the whole... Their country area of forest is growing like crazy. So they're really patting themselves on the back, and they have done a great job in reforestation. They've planted more trees than any other nation.
But I sense a but coming along here.
Yeah. But, the thing is that they've got enough food to feed their people, but they haven't got enough feed to feed their livestock. And the amount of pigs in China has just gone through the roof. Yeah. And where they get the feed for their pigs is... It's largely genetically modified soybean and maize, and the largest exporter of that is Brazil and other South American nations, and North America, by the way. But that's the largest international buyer of those feeds is China, followed by Europe. So China is reforesting its own country, and it's deforesting Brazil and other South American countries.
So they look clean and green on paper, but they're outsourcing the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so every decision we make has a global implication.
So this whole destruction of the Amazon forest is not even just for Brazil's own needs. It's the crops, and this is what a lot of people don't understand as well. When you have this whole debate about the lesser impact, environmental impact that general, bean crops and vegetables and so on have versus, grazing pastures, is that a big chunk of the crops are actually used for animal feed. It's not even for us.
Yes.
If the whole world went plant-based overnight, we wouldn't have to destroy a single tree because we now have too much land to feed ourselves, let alone, because we're now not needing to feed the animals, the cows, the pigs, the sheep, etc. So it's such a disconnect, isn't it the West that actually caused the problem in the first place in China by introducing meat, and, meat consumption is great, it's good for you, it's a better source of protein than soy. And now, but China still has a demand for meat, so let's just, like you say, create make someone else's problem.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, about 90% of the world's soybeans are actually fed to animals, not humans. And Wally Fry actually got into strife some time ago for the European market because some of his soybean was contaminated with Brazilian soybeans.
Oh, wow.
Which are genetically modified. So, you've got to be, if you're sourcing soybeans, you've got to be really particular. It's difficult.
Yeah. Gerard, this has been an absolutely enlightening conversation, a lot of passion. We really admire, how many years you've exposed yourself to so much angst with what's happening to our planet. You've certainly got to see a lot what the majority of us will never get to see. But you certainly have a lot of channels where you've sort of offered the opportunity to create this awareness, and we really, really look forward to the double whammy, the new book and the documentary, Eating Our Way to Extinction, hopefully released in what are we now, July, so a couple of months. Hopefully we're not too far away from that, but we really want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your super busy schedule and coming onto the show.
It's a great pleasure, Ben, and thank you, Emma, for setting this up. That's wonderful. And if you want to do another talk after the release of the documentary, I'll be more than happy.
We would absolutely love that. We look forward to part 2. There's so much more to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much again, Gerard. We really appreciate it.
Terrific. Thank you.
And I just want to do a really quick little plug for anyone who's interested. Please head to worldpreservationfoundation.org. There's so many marvelous handouts that you can download and read on this further, because there is a lot that we haven't touched on, and it's a brilliant resource. So thank you, Gerard.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.